Next up on our list, Mohsin Khan. So Mohsin Khan's played 9 matches. He's taken 14 wickets. He's averaged 14, and he's gone at an economy rate just under 6. Normally, the stats are only part of the story. They are an important benchmark to sort of assess how a player is doing, but they're not the whole story. But sometimes they're so striking, right, Gurkirat, that they basically just tell the majority of the story, if not the whole story up front. I would argue that he's been the best bowler of the tournament by a big distance, and that those stats are representative of a remarkable debut. But I want to get your thoughts more about how you think his season in general, not necessarily his went, because we know how good it's gone, but what are some of the factors that have allowed him to bowl that well, and where he's really shined in particular?
See, I've said it a few times before. I'm not sure, if I've said that in a conversation with you, but if you were to reduce cricket to just one thing, it would be the length, because the length determines what kind of a shot will the batter play, whether the batter will be on the front foot or the back foot. The length determines whether how the batter will be dismissed, because a shot of length will never get a batter dismissed LBW or bowled, because the ball will go over the stumps. The length determines how the fielders also inside the circle will premeditate. If they see it's a bowler who continues to bowl short of length and is pacey, they know that while the batter is playing the cut, the ball is going to go finer rather than squarer. So the length determines a lot that happens in the game of cricket. It even determines, especially when a keeper's keeping against spinners, if he's going to where his hands are going to move.
Right.
So, and that is the most fascinating part about Mohsin Khan in this IPL. I thought that the lengths that he bowled were immaculate. They were just brilliant. He wasn't giving any floaty full length deliveries for batters to drive. Neither was he bowling so short that the batters could easily go on the back foot and cut him or pull him. He was just bowling that in between, or the three-quarter length, from wherein the batters were just unsure whether they should commit themselves on the front foot or commit themselves on the back foot.
Yeah. And just quickly to interject here, for some of our listeners who don't quite know where that three-quarter length lies, it's about 7 to 8 meters from the stumps in the case of Mohsin. Normally it's 6 to 8, but I felt like he was on the bit of the shorter side. So I just wanted to clarify that if people had questions.
Yeah. And while the speedometer would say that he was bowling probably in the early 130s, the one factor which the speedometer doesn't tell you is that what it tells you is only the horizontal velocity. It only calculates the time that the ball will take to reach from the stumps from the bowling end to the batting end. But
right.
When the bowler bowls or when he puts in the effort, there's also the vertical component of velocity, which is never measured and it's never a part of the speedometers, which is why even though McGrath, was not so high on the speedometer, you always felt that he was rushing the batters, because the speedometers weren't accounting for how quick the ball was coming off the pitch or what was the vertical component of the speed, which I felt was the case with Mohsin Khan as well. That even though his speed was only in the high 130 or in the early 130s, mostly ranging between 130 to 135, it did feel that he was rushing the batters, and it's probably because the vertical component or how he was hitting those lengths given his height was not being accounted for, and even the batters had difficulty adjusting to it.
That's a really good summary of, I think, why his IPL career so far has been so spectacular, right? I will say I did actually see him bowl a lot more as the tournament went on, in the mid 130s to late 130s, and I remember his first match he was actually clocking 140s consistently. He did actually bowl, funny enough, I remember even
he did actually bowl upwards of 140 as well. But whenever he was looking for swing,
Right.
he brought it down. Because also people need to understand that there's an optimum speed of getting swing. The optimum speed of getting swing is what is the speed with which Praveen Kumar operated at. If you're going to, the quicker you are going to bowl, the lesser you are going to get swing. So this is why sometimes when there is swing available, fast bowlers tend to bowl a little slower than what they would usually do.
Right. It definitely depends, obviously, on the bowler, but that is that is very much the case, right? Like with the newer ball, often it's harder to control the swing and bowl as with as much deviation if you're a lot quicker than, say, if you cut it down a little bit. A lot of new ball bowlers in the world will do that intentionally. They'll dial themselves back for that entire purpose. It is interesting that you brought up that vertical component, right? It's especially the case now because actually, from my understanding of how it works with the speed guns nowadays, right? They're timed out of the hand, essentially. The first couple of meters, because they have to try to display it to an audience. So they actually time it out of the hand, where because it's only taking those first few frames before it actually bounces. You can't actually even see, like it's impossible for them to actually assign a vertical sort of component to it because it's not actually bouncing, right? But
I understand, because the displacement is mostly linear in those few moments. So the horizontal component would more likely become the main speed, but there is still a path to be traveled vertically,
right.
And that really doesn't get accounted for.
Right. So it's really good that you brought that up, right? Because I think that is super important with Mohsin Khan. There were points where batsmen, I remember, especially once he came back into the side, he initially wasn't. It's funny to think that a guy who had such a sterling impact in the stellar impact in the tournament actually didn't play the entire tournament. He only came in as a replacement for Avesh Khan when Avesh got injured, and then by the time Avesh came back and was fully fit, he was bowling so well that they literally couldn't drop him. And he's bowling well in all phases of the game, right? I think that's another thing that's really important. There are some bowlers, like we brought up the example of Mukesh Chaudhary, who were clearly more comfortable in the power play than in all eras and all parts of the tournament. But often Mohsin Khan, as KL Rahul saw more of a skill set, started giving him overs in the death, and he was as ridiculously economical in those. He was economical during the middle stages, so he was able to marshal all different phases of the game, right? Which is what I thought was super impressive. In terms of his action and in terms of how he bowls, right? I think that's a huge factor of his success as well, and it's really fascinating, right? Because I have, as somebody who is interested in this sort of stuff, biomechanics and so forth, his action is it's difficult to describe because it's almost like very few bowlers have the skill sets and the action that he does, even amongst left-handers, which are already a rare specimen. You mentioned that he could swing the ball, and I did see him swinging the ball in. But one of the things that actually I saw him naturally do, which I've seen almost no left-arm bowler in the last 20 years do, is actually seam the ball away. And that would be his natural way of actually moving the ball away to the right-handers. Now,
if I'm not wrong, I think he got du Plessis out that way in the eliminator.
Yep,
and
exactly.
Again, what I mentioned, that du Plessis wasn't sure whether he should go on the front foot or be on the back foot, and he just played it from the crease. He just played from the crease, playing the initial line of the ball, and the ball just deviated a little in the end and took the edge.
Yep, and that's what's remarkable, because he clearly has a seam position, and he has the remarkable capability to get the ball to seam off the deck away from the right-hander. Again, that's just not something most left-arm bowlers do, because normally they try to bring the ball back in to the right-hander because the natural movement is away from the left-hander. They swing it away. And it's, to just give you an idea of how rare it is, probably the best current left-arm bowler operating in world cricket in all three formats today it's debatable, but one of them is, who's certainly up on that list is Shaheen Shah Afridi. Now, Shaheen Shah Afridi doesn't have an outswinger to the right-hander. He's come out and admitted it. He doesn't really even move the ball that much away from the right-hander. So for a guy making his debut, to be able to do that consistently and that being his natural way of moving it, it's just it's a freak of nature, really. And that alone, sets him apart from other bowlers. But then the other thing that sets him apart, like you mentioned, right, and it's the reason why he can bowl that length, is that he gets a lot of bounce. And it's weird because he's only like 6 feet from what I've seen and what I've looked at.
I think he's taller. I think he's probably 6'1" or 6'2". I'm not sure, but that's the impression that I got.
That's certainly could be the case, right? But either ways, he's not someone like a Shaheen Shah Afridi who is like 6'4" or 6'6" or something, right? He's not as tall as Shaheen Shah Afridi. And despite that, I feel like sometimes he gets more bounce than a Shaheen Shah Afridi, which is bizarre. Again, right? It's just not something that you would expect with somebody who's that big. And I think the reason why he does that is a couple of factors, right? He despite not having a high arm action, right? Like if you look at Shaheen Shah Afridi, Mitchell Starc, they actually have higher arm actions than him. Their release points are in theory should be higher because they're taller and they just have that sort of a thing. But he doesn't have his knee braced at the point of release, which some of those bowlers do, and allows them to bowl from a taller height as well. But what he does have is a very sizable wingspan, and that's why I think when you first look at him, right, it seems like he's bowling it from a much higher release point than his natural height would allow him to, because that wingspan, it's sort of like Kemar Roach. Now Kemar Roach is a bowler who bowls round arm, but when Kemar Roach was initially burst onto the scene, one of the things that somebody like a Fazir Muhammad or an Ian Bishop, who commentated in this IPL, often mentioned was, even though the guy is like 5'9", because he has such a huge wingspan, he would get the bounce of a 6'2" bowler despite bowling round arm. And that's kind of what actually I see being important with Mohsin Khan.
I'll add one more thing. I thought that when he actually bowled it fuller, the batters were caught by surprise. My mind goes back to the Pant dismissal in that Lucknow DC game at Wankhede. Pant was batting quite well, but he was dismissed to a fuller one, and he was bowled to a fuller one by Mohsin. And it felt that, he was completely taken by surprise. I'm not sure whether it was due to the length or due to the pace. I don't think the pace should have been an issue for Pant, because he's faced quicker bowlers before and he's done decently. He was playing Chamira quite decently, who's again pacey. But I just felt that because, his natural length is that 3/4 length, so whenever he does bowl a little full, batters get taken by surprise. And, there might be this tendency that, okay, since his release is higher, that the ball might take some more time to reach the stumps. Maybe that is the case. But when he bowled full, and this is one dismissal, there's another dismissal that I'm trying to recall, but I'm not able to. It just felt that whenever he bowled full, the batters were taken by surprise out of nowhere.
I absolutely concur with you on that. And I think part of the reason why they're taken by surprise, you mentioned, obviously you mentioned the fact of, that being sort of an unconventional length. But I think another factor of it is also just he again has something what you would call like a delayed action, right? Delayed fast arm action, which is to say, like the arm pull that he has comes in much later than the batsmen anticipate, and it's greater than even someone like a Mark Wood, who's considered to be like a very quick bowler and bowls with a delayed arm action that makes him faster. So even when he's bowling mid 130s, right, he can often seem to a batsman and give them enough cues that somebody who's bowling in the mid or the low 140s is, right. That's really difficult to play, and it's very difficult to play, especially if the ball is just deviating a little bit and it's fuller. So I think that's another factor about him, because he essentially what happens is he comes like the way his action is, he appears sort of at last minute in the eyes of a batsman, right? And that's the worst thing that a batsman wants to have, right? They want to be able to have a predictable way of being able to spot cues and facing deliveries that are of that particular pace. And then the final thing about him is and again, this is a very specific thing I noticed in his action. Usually, when a bowler lands, they have front foot contact and they have back foot contact, right? That's components. Both your feet land while when you're about to deliver the ball and stuff. Um, and his back foot, he drags his back foot along the pitch as early as the point of the front foot contact, right? And so what that does is, again, we're talking about momentum. It allows him to push his body forward during his delivery, and that in turn allows him to bowl faster.
Let me guess, it allows him to keep his action and body be more robust to injuries as opposed to others, because there is the transfer of weight is happening through the entire body and not through just one part of the body. Because if he's dragging that back foot along, it just basically means that his weight is also transferred somewhat equally, if I might want to understand.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Now, obviously, there are like you do still put strain in certain parts.
Yeah,
of your body.
that is I think that's unavoidable. But I'm talking about the relatively less strain, because if your back foot is not moving, right, and it's only your braced front leg on which the entire body load is coming,
Yep.
then obviously the stress is going to be a lot more. But I think if the back foot's moving, it basically means that there isn't that sudden change of momentum or that sudden impulsive force that can sometimes cause a lot of harm to your muscles.
No.
Basically means that there's a very momentarily change, and that force might not be that much.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of summing it up for a lot of people, right? Because that's the advantage that he has. And if you've noticed, right, he comes in with what, 10, 12 strides to the crease. He doesn't have a long run up. He doesn't even have he doesn't look like he's putting a lot of effort in. But I think it's those sort of factors that allow him to actually be super optimized and actually cause a lot of problems for the batsman that he's facing against. And I think it's just an assortment of factors that make him such an exciting prospect. So yeah, Mohsin Khan, been a revelation this season. And the main question that comes to my mind is, how much can he go further? He's already, looked insanely impressive for somebody making his debut, but how much can he look better from even this point? How much can he grow? And how much do you see him making his mark at the IPL stage as well as at the international level? So I'll hand it over to you, Gurkirat. What do you think are your thoughts regarding that? I know he's only played one season, and you mentioned not to fast track people on one season, yeah, but just in general.
So I won't fast track him yet, but I do see him becoming an India international player at some point of time, purely because of what all we discussed and the raw tools that he has. So not sure when. Probably he's 23. Probably by the time he's 25, 26, he might play for India. But I definitely do see him playing for India at some point of time.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. For me, I know you mentioned the length being very good, right, of his, but I think I like Mohsin Khan, and I like the idea of Mohsin Khan at the test level, right? But I think my biggest concern right now is he had the highest percentage of short pitch deliveries in the IPL in general. Now, a lot of these were the length that you were talking about, the 3/4 good length, but a lot of these were short. I feel like he could be like an Andrew Flintoff, Morning Morkel sort of bowler who beats the bat a lot if he was playing longer format cricket, but then not to go ahead. So I think he's got to work on that and bowl a little bit fuller, but he's already shown skill sets to do that. And I think with time he'll develop that. But yeah, again, like with a lot of the others we've been talking about, a lot to like about Mohsin Khan.